White Mountain Bigfoot, Volume 1, Chapter 2, Attack. It had been about 4 weeks, best I could tell, since I had fallen. My leg had been healing nicely. The beasts had done a good job setting it. I was constantly amazed at how much they knew. It was obvious that they had experience in tending wounds. The female had changed the bandage on the wound in my side every day with a mixture of leaves and seeds ground up into a poultice. Sometimes she had the teenage beast do it. I figured she was training him. The poultice had worked extremely well. After a week, it was no longer necessary. I had explored the cave a bit more. They went back into a second room that the beast used for a bedroom. Where I slept was a side tunnel that narrowed down to a crawl but kept going. Without a light, I had not explored it further. I suspected it kept going because at times I felt a light breeze coming from it. I had spent some time studying the paintings on the wall and was quite impressed with some of them. I don't pretend to understand much about such things, but they told stories of hunts and fights, mostly between Indians and giant tiger-looking animals, but with long teeth. I had never seen anything like it. Others of large, hairy elephants with long tusks. I had taken to exploring the basin we were in every day. The beasts never stopped me, but never let me go alone either. Always one of the 3 older ones followed along, but always at a distance. The only time I had been stopped was when I got too close to the entrance. The adult male that I had taken to calling Samson from the Bible story was with me that day. As I got close to the opening, he grunted softly. I pretended not to hear him and kept walking. He let out a growl that was fair to make my hair stand on end. I did not push it any further. It was fair to say I was their prisoner. They had made no effort to hurt me. For the most part, they seemed not to even notice I was there. I decided my leg was feeling good enough to cross the creek and explore what looked like ruins under the cliff on the far side. I found a place where I could step from stone to stone to get across the creek without getting wet. Once I crossed over, I walked a few feet, then looked back to see if the teenager was coming. I had taken to calling him Zacchaeus, like the short tax collector in the Bible. Not that Zacchaeus was short. He had grown at least an inch since I had been there, and was now at least 6'1". It was just that he was still much shorter than his parents. As I watched, he took a running leap and cleared the creek in a single jump. The creek had to be 20 feet across, and he left plenty of room on each side. On impulse, I clapped and cheered. He seemed pleased at my praise. I got the feeling he was trying to show off like a normal kid. I continued on, resting often while leaning on my walking stick. Zacchaeus waited patiently. Finally, I reached the base of the cliff. It had to be about 500 feet high. The ledge the cliff dwellings were on was about 50 feet up. A staircase had been hand-carved into the stone. Resting a minute, I climbed to the top. I stood there staring in amazement at the 3 stories of structure that was before me. My father had been a stonemason in the old country and had brought his tools and skills with him. He would have loved to see these buildings. I spent the next hour exploring the dwellings. They were in surprisingly good condition and well sheltered back under the overhanging cliff. I was starting down the steps when I heard a blood-curdling, guttural scream that made my chest vibrate. Zacchaeus took one look at me, then immediately replied with a matching scream before bounding past me and across the meadow. Something was wrong, but I did not know what. Zacchaeus had seemed frightened and angry at the same time. Hurrying as best I could, I headed towards the cave. As I got close to the cave entrance, I saw blood on the ground. I stopped, studied it closer. It appeared to have come from the entrance to the valley and disappeared into the cave. I had just started to turn and go into the cave when a movement caught my eye. I turned and sidestepped, quickly drawing my Colt Peacemaker as I did so. The move had undoubtedly saved my life because an arrow nicked the right side of my throat, leaving a bloody scratch. I fired twice so rapidly that it sounded like a single shot. The warrior that had fired the arrow at me dropped to the ground, unmoving, a hole above his left eye and another one over his heart. A second painted warrior stepped through the opening, drawing a bead on me with his arrow. I fired quickly, too quickly. He dropped the bow and clutched his shoulder, blood oozing out between his fingers before disappearing back into the passageway. I sent another bullet through the opening to discourage any more warriors that might have ideas of coming through. There was no response. I waited a moment, then thumbed the spent cartridges out, replacing them with fresh rounds before ducking into the cave. I almost got my head bashed in by Zacchaeus, who was standing guard just inside the door with a stout piece of firewood in his hands. He recognized me quickly, but did not lower the club. I could see the fear and anger in his eyes. Slowly, hands raised, I stepped farther into the cave, speaking softly to him. He stepped back, but kept the club handy. Walking around the corner into the room, I stopped as I saw Samson lying on his stomach, moaning softly. Meanwhile, Delilah, that's what I had taken to calling the adult female, was working to stop the bleeding from 2 holes left by arrows that she had already pulled from his back. There were still 2 more sticking out of his right shoulder and 1 in his lower back that had to be removed. I approached carefully as she looked up suspiciously. I held both hands up, palms out, and spoke softly. Then I went to my saddlebags against the wall and pulled out a first aid kit. I had worked with a surgeon during the war between the states and knew a little about wound care. It appeared that the arrows had only gone into the muscle and no deeper, so great was the muscle mass. Applying pressure with a clean bandage, we worked together to stop the bleeding and get the other arrows removed. Soon he was bandaged and resting with a fresh poultice on the wounds. He was weak from the loss of blood, but should recover nicely. From the old scars I had seen, this did not appear to be his first battle. I took my rifle and went out quietly, motioning for Zacchaeus to follow. He did, with club in hand. Going to the dead Indian, I recognized him as one from the band that had chased me. Rifle in hand, I searched inside the passage, leading back out into the desert. Other than a few drops of blood, there was no sign anything had happened. Returning, I buried the dead Indian with Zacchaeus helping. I was exhausted by this point, and my injured leg was throbbing. Going back inside, I set the mat in place and retrieved an empty tin can from my saddlebag. Dropping a few small rocks in it and hanging it in such a way that anyone moving the mat would set off a racket that would alert us to them coming. Moving the mat, I showed Zacchaeus what it would do. He seemed to understand, but I could not tell for sure. I went back into the cave. Samson was resting on his side, on a deer hide spread on the floor next to the fire. He had lost a lot of blood, but was awake. Other than a low moan, he had never made a sound when Delilah pulled the arrows from his back. I nodded at him, but he just stared back. I wished I knew what he was thinking. Cutting a fresh chunk from what was left of the deer hanging on the wall, I offered it to him. He took it and ate slowly. Tomorrow I'd have to replenish the food supply. I would not attempt to leave until Samson was back on his feet. Well, that was chapter 2 of my new book. Hope you guys enjoyed it. The action doesn't start until chapter 3 though, so you're gonna have to stick around for that one. Or it's available on Kindle and Amazon in print. You'll get the whole book that way. I'm only reading enough to whet your appetite, to get you interested. So let me know what you think about the book so far though. Had fun writing it and hope you guys are having fun listening to it.